Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome you this evening for a very special event. Our speaker is visiting us at a time when America is struggling, as he has correctly put it, to make the transition from recovery to long-term growth. The worst of what is now being called the Great Recession may be behind us, but our unemployment picture is disappointing and our fiscal position is perilous. Events around the world, notably the devastating earthquake and tsunami in Japan, the instability in North Africa and the Middle East, and the continuing risk of a sovereign debt crisis in the Eurozone are buffeting the global economy. Our speaker has firsthand experience with the troubles that our nation and indeed the world are facing. As CEO of General Electric for almost a decade, he has led his company through the most challenging economic environment since the Great Depression. And despite the difficult times, GE has emerged again as a blue-chip investment and industry leader. That's why earlier this year, President Barack Obama appointed him to lead the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Through this panel, he will work with small and large businesses, labor, economists, and the government to encourage businesses to hire and invest in American competitiveness. It is a daunting task, but he is eminently well qualified for it, and we should all wish him success in his endeavors. Our speaker became an officer of GE in 1989 and joined the GE Capital Board in 1997. In 2000, he was appointed president and chairman-elect. He is the 9th chairman of a storied American company whose roots can be traced to Thomas Edison. Barron's has named him one of the world's best CEOs, not once, but 3 times. And GE has been named one of the world's most respected companies in polls by both Barron's and the Financial Times. He is a member of the Business Council, and he sits on the board of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. I have to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, I never hear the name GE or General Electric, that I don't think about the time after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War when Prime Minister Golda Meir of Israel visited Lyndon Johnson in the White House, and Lyndon Johnson was congratulating her for the military victory. And he said, you know, he said, we really would like to borrow a General Diane from you sometime. She said, well, Mr. President, we'd be delighted to loan General Diane to you, but I'd like to borrow 2 of your generals. And he said, really? Who? And she said, General Electric and General Motors. So now our speaker in GE, I think it's true, Jeff. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but it makes a good story. Our speaker and GE have sponsored nationwide events during the past year, celebrating what would have been the 100th birthday of their former employee and my former boss, Ronald Wilson Reagan. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jeff Immelt to the podium.
Well, thank you, Secretary Baker, and it's great to be with you here today. I've had the chance to meet Secretary Baker during the Reagan Centennial, and it was a great event for GE in the last year. President Reagan did work for us for 8 years, from 1956 to 1964 as our spokesman, and we had the chance to celebrate the 100th anniversary in the last year, so it's great to be back with you. It's an honor to be here at Rice, and I'm really pleased to be here. You know, I'm an avid reader, and Douglas MacArthur once said, there's no security on earth, there's only opportunity. And I've certainly found that to be true over the last 10 years of leading GE. America closed the last century at peace, victorious in a long Cold War, flush with unprecedented prosperity, and certain that the new century would be better than our brighter past. And then going back to 2000, a bubble burst, a recession ensued, our country was attacked, we had a devastating hurricane in New Orleans, we are experiencing 2 wars, A global financial crisis plunged us into another recession, worse than its predecessor. Last year, we had an uncapped oil well in the Gulf for 3 months, and recently there was a devastating earthquake and nuclear crisis in Japan. Now, even with all that, the world we see in 2011 is getting better. We see signs of economic strength. Demand for products is growing. Global markets remain strong. Deal activity is robust, and corporate borrowers are optimistic. But it's hard to take encouragement from these signs if you've lost a job, if your mortgage is underwater, and if your income and opportunities seem stagnant compared to some that are better off. So I've frequently said inside GE that we think the global economy has been reset. And in this reset world, we do have opportunities to succeed beyond the achievements of previous generations. And business can lead this renewal. I mean, I think business has done a fair amount right. Our productivity is high. The information technology is strong. And we're the world leader in important industries like aviation. But I still think we have to rid ourselves of a few fallacies of the past. And I'll recap a few lessons that I think we've learned. We must have a balanced economy based on both services and manufacturing. A $1 trillion trade deficit is inconsistent with strength and success. We must export more, innovate more, and manufacture more. We've got to save more and use leverage and moderation. Huge budget deficits create weakness and uncertainty in the future. And we all must care about inequality and unemployment. Upon reflection, the good old days weren't always as good as they seemed. Excess leverage did create a growth mirage over the past 20 or 25 years. And today, we've got to fight for both our competitiveness and our reputation. We have to learn to win in a new economic cycle where growth is happening at multiple speeds. Developing markets like Brazil and India are experiencing fast growth, while much of the developed world is dealing with a sluggish rebound and fiscal constraints. China, unlike Japan before it, can be sustained as an economic powerhouse. Globally, governments are more active as they grapple with problems ranging from high unemployment to healthcare inflation to crumbling infrastructure. Volatility has become a way of life. Commodity costs are increasing as the economy recovers. Geopolitical risk is now on the rise. And disruption in countries like Egypt and Libya can now shake the global markets. And for the first time in about 2,500 years, global business leaders actually think about Greece. Classic economic cycles have become shorter and more segmented. Long-term growth is interrupted by short-term volatility like we see today. So companies have to invest to grow while remaining fast and productive. So it's a turbulent time, and when people lose confidence in their future, they're prone to act on their fears and not their hopes. So we've begun a great debate, I think, in boardrooms and government capitals. How do we compete? How do we create new jobs? How do we win in this new economic era? Now, in modern times, I think private enterprises have to serve two roles. We must drive economic growth, but we also must be a force for change, and we try to do both. GE has not been immune to the forces that have rocked the world, but we're a resilient company. We have certain pillars that stay the same through the ages: integrity, performance, and innovation. But at the same time, great companies have to embrace change. It's hard sometimes, particularly when you've been successful. I still get questions about GE's management practices from the 70s and 80s, when 80% of our revenue was in the US, global competition was non-existent, and the world was at peace. So I thought I'd share some of the key changes we've made in the company over the last 10 years. And I also want to give you some views on what we've learned about competitiveness. The first thing is, despite being a 125-year-old company, we basically changed out 50% of our portfolio in the last decade, 50% of dispositions. And basically what we wanted to do instead was become the world's biggest infrastructure company. So we reinvested in our portfolio, and over the last 10 years, we've really created the world's biggest infrastructure company. So today we lead in energy and oil and gas and water and aviation and healthcare, but we've sold businesses like insurance and plastics and our media business, where we didn't think we could be as competitive over the long term. So dramatic changes in the footprint of the portfolio. We built $20 billion of new businesses. One of the things I did here in Houston today was visit many of our oil and gas customers. GE has built an $11 billion oil and gas franchise in the last 10 years from zero in 1999. So we've built new businesses as we were changing out some of our old businesses. We've repositioned financial services. If you were in financial services the day Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, you had to do some changing. We were not immune from that. But we built a smaller, more focused GE Capital business. We're the country's best lender to mid-market enterprise. And today we've got a more competitive franchise. So today we've got the best portfolio of businesses we've had in a generation. We're an infrastructure and financial service company. There'll be about $5 trillion invested in infrastructure globally over the next 5 years. That's a pretty good place to be. Now, the second thing we did is we took our R&D spending from 2% of our revenue to 6% of our revenue. Threefold increase in R&D. We've always been good at the science of management. I think we wanted to be good again at the science of science. In the end, R&D, technology, innovation is what sets a company apart. We're good at complex systems, we're good at low-cost innovation, we innovate all over the world, but science and engineering have become the heart of what GE stands for again. The third thing is we dramatically increased our global footprint. In 2000, about 30% of our revenues were outside the United States. In 2010, about 60% of our revenues outside the United States. And we see our business outside the United States growing faster than our business inside the United States. We are one of the country's biggest exporters. We export almost $20 billion of goods and services every year. So we have built a franchise here that we can export globally. We invested again in our operational capability, manufacturing. I think we felt like we had outsourced too much. We are a very good manufacturing company, and we have built good capabilities in that. And just in the last 12 months, we're bringing almost all of our appliance manufacturing back to the United States. We can now build call centers in the United States that are only 10% more expensive than India. And we've reinvested again in the operational capability of the company. And the last thing we really focused on was positioning the company in big solutions. Clean energy, affordable health care, some of the things that were really going to drive economic growth in this generation. So we had enough courage to really throw out the business model of the 80s and 90s. We changed out 50% of our portfolio, invested a lot in technology and operational capability, dramatically globalized the company, and established ourselves as a manufacturing powerhouse, all in the last 10 years. Now, in the last decade, we would rank third in the world behind only Exxon and Shell in our cumulative earnings. And coming out of the financial crisis, our results are improving, with earnings growth accelerating yet again in 2011. We've got a lot of cash that we can use to plot our future, to build factories, to increase dividend, to do buybacks and acquisitions. And I've never been more confident in GE's ability to compete and win in the global economy. So we've persevered in the tough times, and it's made us a better company. Perseverance is a source of confidence, and I'm privileged to lead GE, but I also know that we've got a responsibility to the country that's made it possible for GE to succeed. I run a global enterprise. I'm an unapologetic globalist. We're a private enterprise. We wouldn't rank in the top 30 of government contractors, and only 4% of our revenue is sold to the US government. But the world looks to America for leadership, and I'm committed to do my best through my role on the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. And I'll work with other CEOs and public leaders to improve America's future. Increasing our competitiveness for the opportunities in the reset world won't be achieved overnight. We're reversing trends that were long in the making, and the reforms we must make are not easy politically, socially, or economically. Our council is focused on jobs and competitiveness, not reducing the budget deficit per se, but let me commend the Simpson-Bowles Commission. Their thoughtful recommendations on spending reduction, tax policy, and entitlement reforms would help provide, I think, a very useful context. Our council is still new, but we're making progress, and we've assembled a great group of leaders from some of our country's most inspiring small businesses and largest corporations, respected economists, and labor leaders. And we've identified some early focus areas that have the potential to accelerate job growth. We've created teams to foster the elements of long-term competition, and we're focused on identifying deliverables and metrics. Ultimately, from a business context, we need a jobs plan. Competitiveness depends on productivity, and U.S. productivity must expand faster to sustain historic economic growth. Productivity accelerates job growth when it's driven by innovation and investment. And job growth has been slow in this recovery. There appear to be structural shifts in sectors and geographies. There's training and talent mismatches between labor supply and demand. Small business formation is trailing historic levels, and businesses invested more in efficiency and less in innovation. And so with this in mind, here are a few of our priorities as we get started in this effort. First, we have to have a very strong focus on small business. New business creation is down 23% in this recession, much larger than previous times. If this recovery had been more typical, small business would have created 1 to 2 million more jobs in the last 2 years. So the Council plans to invest substantial outreach to small business. In the meantime, we should improve the multiple financing vehicles for new business growth, expedite small business loans or venture co-financing, and we can develop new markets for small business like commercial building retrofits. Big business can help small business through supplier programs or financing, but we have to get this great growth engine back on track. Second, we'll target leadership in technology, R&D, and innovation. We should encourage long-term thinking and prioritization around R&D in the public and private sectors. In addition, we have to reduce the skills mismatch in the labor market. We need a commitment to reforming public education initiatives like Race to the Top to show the impact that competitive dollars can do in education. 44 states have taken the lead in adopting common standards that will help drive improved performance in science and math. In the mix of state and local and federal reform in partnership with private sector companies will really help, are needed to generate more engineers and scientists. And these reforms will help the U.S. compete more successfully. Our universities are the best in the world, but we're graduating more people with sports exercise degrees than electrical engineers. And that is not a formula for long-term competitiveness. Intel's a great global company. They're investing $7 billion a year in R&D. They're also investing in a skilled American workforce that'll expand their manufacturing operations in the U.S. And they're making the hard long-term investments in America's future that'll make Intel an exceptional competitor in a new economic era. Changing our immigration policies is also essential. Because our universities and colleges are the best in the world, students from all over enroll at them. We would like them to excel and remain here, become loyal citizens, and make valuable contributions to America's progress. One early focus on the Council will be to improve education and workforce training. We'll sponsor a roadmap to create 10,000 incremental engineers in this country every year. In addition, we'll focus on community colleges and skills training to fill the demand that exists today. The Council will try to deliver a more competitive U.S. workforce. Third, we're going to focus on ways to win in a growing global market. If you just look at the success of a great global company like Boeing, to understand the opportunities available for American business. More than 80% of their backlog will be sold in overseas markets. We have to increase not only our exports to overseas markets, but the number of markets we can compete in successfully. We have to become the world's leading exporter. To achieve that, we should quickly pass the 3 free trade agreements currently before Congress. The rest of the world is moving without us. The rest of the world is moving on trade. We can't get left behind. Those who advocate increasing domestic manufacturing jobs by competing less in overseas markets have it exactly wrong. 95% of the world's consumers live outside the U.S., and currently, the U.S. ranks among the world's largest manufacturers. We rank lowest in export intensity. And working closely with Jim McNerney and the Export Council, we'll propose programs that support the President's initiative to double exports in the next 5 years. Next, we're really going to work hard on proposing solutions for infrastructure, energy security, and affordable health care. And these are pillars that can ensure long-term competitiveness. 2 crises, one in the Middle East and one in Japan, make us understand the critical role that energy plays in our economy. Volatile oil prices reemphasize the need for more domestic supply, fuel diversity, and new technology. And while nuclear may be questioned, we must remain committed to the industry. And we'll all learn from the events created by the horrific earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Energy policy is controversial. and it's very unlikely that the US will lead. But how many times do we have to watch massive energy price volatility before we act? I truly believe the US can achieve energy security through investment in energy infrastructure and R&D. And I know we can create jobs through energy efficiency retrofits and other programs. Similarly, business will be working on affordable health care for the rest of our lives. The solution is probably not going to come from the public sector. In our own company, we're seeing the value of high deductible plans and technology. Business should lead the significant ongoing debate and action around healthcare inflation with the goal to cut it substantially in the next decade. America's infrastructure has declined dramatically in a generation. Crumbling roads and ports impair our ability to export. Our broadband capability trails global leaders like Korea, and infrastructure investments are the only way to rebuild productivity and private sector construction jobs. So the Council will focus on infrastructure investment as a source of job creation and competitiveness. Private capital exists to fix some of these projects, but many projects require investment certainty provided by clear public policy, and infrastructure is key to long-term growth. Finally, I think we can improve the collaboration between government and business. History has proved the superiority of free market economies where private initiative and individual choice are the great engine of progress. But business and government can work together to improve our competitiveness. Government should encourage business as it seeks to revitalize our manufacturing competitiveness with incentives for investing in R&D, opening new markets to our goods with free trade agreements, and changing tax policies that discourage business from investing overseas earnings back in the US. It's time to examine regulation and its impact on jobs. Regulation serves a necessary purpose. Clear rules of the road help businesses, their customers, and society. But piling numerous and often uncoordinated regulations on top of out-of-date regulatory processes creates needless uncertainty. So the Council will make some constructive recommendations on tax policy and regulatory competitiveness, but it's important that they be balanced. In other words, we must recognize the reality of the budget deficit. So we're off to a good start with a few focused ideas. Government can work with business to improve the conditions to expand and create jobs, but it can't create and sustain those jobs for us. That's our job. The principles of capitalism, competitiveness, innovation, and free markets that have allowed America to succeed for generations can win again today. But we must invest more of our cash on the American worker, particularly in manufacturing. They can compete. They must be given the chance. Over the past decade, GE's US employment is up, excluding our dispositions. And employment in our infrastructure businesses are up 30% since 2000. Meanwhile, our exports have grown from about $7 billion in 2000 to almost $20 billion in a decade. And in 2010 and 2011, GE will add 16,000 jobs in the US, comprised of manufacturing and high-tech services. American can and should be competitive while manufacturing more of their products for global markets here at home. It doesn't mean business will be able to locate all of their operations in the US, but we can create enough new jobs to give the middle class a better future. So the US has a growth challenge, but we've come through a difficult time as a country. But anger and cynicism doesn't create jobs. Only optimists invest in the future. Over the past decade, I've traveled the world extensively and have met almost every CEO. And in every corner of the world, business leaders believe in globalization. In fact, they're all globalists. But at the same time, they can also root for their own country. That's true in India. It's true in Germany. It's true in France. It's true in Brazil. It's true in Japan. And it's certainly true in China. We can do the same thing here. We have the cash to create jobs, but how do we create the confidence? The fact is, we can do a lot on our own. We don't need to wait for much. The political parties disagree on policy, and that's okay. But everyone, especially the president, wants to create a more positive environment where business can win. So the American dream's not dead. I don't think we responded as well as we could have when the world embraced the same economic values we've always championed. But the eventful first decade of this new century, I think, has caused every business, I know it has for GE, has caused us to reassess and see clearly where our great opportunities lie. We know how to become the most successful competitors in a global economy. So there is no security in the world. There's only opportunity. I think we've known that instinctively for all of our history. I know we can outwork and outsell anyone in the world, and in that way we can surpass our accomplishments, the past accomplishments in the future. So thank you very much. It's great to be here, and now I think we've got time for questions. Thank you. Okay, great.
Okay, if you kindly come to the microphones with your questions and state who you are. Not a full biography, just a name will do.
Okay. I'm John Endy. I'm a senior here at Rice. And Mr. Immelt, I have a question for you. I'm sure you're aware of the New York Times article that was published a week ago about General Electric, and I was wondering if you could comment on 3 points that the article raised. So first, I was wondering if you could talk about its report that GE paid no income tax last year, and second, what positive effect does the $200 million you guys spent on lobbying over the past decade have on American politics? And the third question is, how do you set aside your biases as CEO of GE and also as part of the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness?
So, our tax rate in 2008 and 2009 was low. We lost $32 billion in our financial service business over that time period. It's a tough way to get a low tax rate. Our tax rate is going to be much higher in 2011 in the future, but let me tell you, we got socked with losses during that time period. Look, we can talk about GE and other companies. Rarely does business speak with one voice, but they do in taxes. Our system is old, it's outdated, it's complicated, and all of us are for closing the loopholes, absolutely a lower corporate tax rate, and a territorial system, just like all of our global competitors have. So our tax rate will go up. Our business speaks with one voice that our tax system needs to be reformed. And in terms of being CEO of GE, look, I think that in every generation, the administration has reached out to the business community to add helpful contributions. GE is a big company. We see a lot of different things. We're a big exporter. We've been associated with success. And I think I can give the president good counsel on things that are going to be important for competitiveness in the future of the United States. And I think I'm able to separate those two roles as we go forward. So that's why the tax rate's low. I think we all want change, and I think it's part of all of our responsibility to help the country.
And the lobbying?
Well, that's when I talk about the lobbying, I talk about the complexity of the system. That is a bad system, and we will advocate our case in that system. We're an investor-owned company in that regard, but we do it legally, and we do it completely transparently inside the law.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike DeLeonardis, and I want to expound on your choice of words, innovation. And I think that with innovation, we can transition our economy from a consumer-based economy to a production-based economy, in a sense, doing discovery versus recovery to a returning back to a consumption-based economy. And these are the three high points that I'd like to address. Beginning to develop a bioeconomy whereby we can combine bioremediation with industrial production to create carbon negative technologies, in a sense the next step beyond carbon neutral of biofuels, doing pollution sequestration of CO2, methane, stuff like arsenic, contaminants, locking them up into biomolecules, refining those molecules into materials like building materials, textiles, durable goods. Again, another point, number 2, integrating our transport system, laying out a national high-speed rail system, linking that to the highway system, which, as you can admit, it has a lot of overhead, is breaking down And there's a lot, in addition to that, there's a lot of water runoff created with that, and a lot of bacterial residues going into our estuaries and gulfs.
Kindly ask a question because
Well, this is more of a flow chart. I'm going to just wrap it up. And using that highway, designing that highway system to allow railroad transport of efficient, compact cars that may influence buyer choice of the vehicle that they're using. And finally, an integrated web-based residential scaled system based on on-site energy generation. I guess you might know that I'm referring to things like Bloom Energy with solid oxide fuel cells, and then developing as time goes on solar primed fuel cells running off of biomass.
Okay, so, yeah.
You're making a speech.
I'm for innovation.
Great. Well, maybe we'll have a chance to talk afterwards.
All kinds.
Thank you.
Good.
Hello, I'm Bill Glick, the Dean for the Jesse H. Jones Graduate School of Business across the way here at Rice University. And I was really taken by your comments about globalization and the role of higher education, and really how U.S. higher education has excelled over the years. But I do have a concern in that we've done a great job of recruiting the best and brightest from around the world, and yet immigration laws are creating some major problems with that, and could see that that could have very negative impact on higher education as well as global economic growth here, particularly in the U.S. What are the prospects for immigration reform?
Look, I think that the job we all have is to present opportunities to do things better. And I think the H-1B visa process we have here, or the lack of process, is creating adverse situation in the U.S., where we're training engineers only that they can go to work in India or Eastern Europe or other places. So what we've tried to do is take a look at a macro proposal. How could we as a country train 10,000 more engineers to be in the United States every year? And so if we use as a macro a goal to make the country more productive and make immigration reform a part of that versus just making it the omnibus of everything, I think we have more of a chance to make it more focused on jobs and competitiveness and less into the huge social debate that immigration always requires. And this is one where, really, when you sit and talk to people in this administration and President Bush's administration, everybody understands the fallacy of what we've created here, where we're training people just to have them go to other places around the world. So we've got the best universities, and our immigration policy isn't creating the kind of technical strength we want to have as a country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm a GE shareholder, and I had intended to challenge you a little bit about your tax structure, but you've satisfied me on that. I'm wondering if your business council is even aware of a major problem that really is one of the major causes of our financial crisis. And that is the dishonesty among the major CPA firms. The whole subprime mortgage scandal could have been nipped in the bud if the CPAs had done their job properly. I am a retired CPA. I am a past professor of auditing at the University of Houston and here at Rice. Will your council look into this matter, because it's vital to the country that we can rely upon the honesty of the CPA firms who audit our public companies? Thank you.
Look, I think, I think transparency and if you are a GE shareholder, you know that our annual report's now 150 pages long. So there's more disclosure and transparency than ever. The council, in the short term, is going to try to stay focused in 5 or 6 areas. We're going to focus on things like exports, education and training, infrastructure, regulatory reform, small business, jobs plan. And so I think in the short term, we're going to try to stay very focused in a couple areas that have the biggest impact on jobs. So
But
I appreciate your point.
If you can't rely on the honesty of the financial statements, we can get back into the type of buying that we had before. The problem is that we passed Sarbanes-Oxley, but we forgot that people who commit fraud will sign anything, and that's basically the problem with Sarbanes-Oxley.
Look, again, I think nothing replaces culture and values inside a company. It's really important.
What
But
are we
I
going to
I don't disagree with your point.
What
It
are we
probably
going to do
won't be
about
where the
the
council.
CPA firms? They're not honest.
Okay, thank you.
Arin Pinto, I'll try to be less combative than some of the others. When it comes to the soft issues and the Business Council is looking at, how do we take America from dealing from a historical past of superiority when it engages the rest of the world in power to a more equal playing field in the global economy? As young people and business persons, that's all we've ever known. How does the Business Council think of this changing dynamic, and how do we get more Americans abroad, more people to use their passports, and maybe even more people to go study abroad and learn how to engage the rest of the world on their terms?
You know, look, I think people of your generation, you know, in the decade of the 1980s, 80% of the global growth took place in the developed world, US, Europe, Japan. This decade, 80% is going to take place in the emerging world. So you're going to have to learn it fast. My first global trip was in 1984. I went to Japan. And in those days, Japan was going to conquer all of us. It was the superiority of the Japanese business system. And I remember I read like 5 books on you're supposed to bow and give the card with your left hand. And you know, there's a whole standard, give a gift and all that stuff. Turns out none of that matters. In my mind, you know, I know how to make money in a country and for a country. In other words, over my almost 30 years with GE, if I go to Turkey, when I hit the ground, I figure out how to make money in Turkey on behalf of my investors, but I also have to figure out how to make money for Turkey, right? If you're going to be welcome over the long term, you got to create the win-win. And I think this notion of win-win is just so important. Now, the benefit I have is I've spent the last 30 years of my life traveling that most people in the United States haven't had the benefit to do. And in many ways, business hasn't done our part to explain you know, how globalization works. That it's not a win-lose game, and we have to do that. So I think we have to do a better job of explaining. At the same time, the fact is, the American worker can compete. And we need to give the people in this country a chance to be able to compete toe-to-toe with anybody else in the world. So I think at the same time, you know, the panorama for GE is in 120 countries around the world, and it's exciting. We also have to think about how do we reinvest in the workforce here so that they find a way to win as we globalize. And I think we can do both. But I think the understanding that you talk about is this sense of win-win. That's got to be what global business is all about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Rado Filip. I'm a first-generation American, and I believe in the American dream. During this recession, a lot of blame was put on Wall Street's narrow short-term view, the pressure of every quarter earnings. Do you think that this is just a reflection of everybody's expectation of my 401k didn't increase by 15% this month, my house didn't overvalue by 50% this year, and so forth? The second part of the question is, do you see the long-term prosperity of our nation a function of resetting the values of the newer generation, getting back to work ethic, getting back to hard work and perseverance as the only way to long-term growth? Thank you.
Two great questions. You know, in the case of GE, look, we make products like jet engines that are going to have a life of 40 or 50 years. So sure, we have to go through quarterly earnings, and it's very important, but you know, most of our products are incredibly big bet, long-term types of products. And so really it's up to a leadership of a company to be able to make the right short and long-term trade-offs. You know, it's not like there's 5 guys in my office with a gun from Wall Street saying, if you don't cut your R&D spending today, you're not gonna make it home tonight, you know? It's on me. And I fully accept the ability to be able to make the right trade-offs and invest in the long term. And in my case, look, I've taken R&D spending from really about $1 billion to $6 billion over a decade. So I put my money where my mouth is. Look, I think hard work counts. Hard work counts. And people that are going to work the hardest ultimately are going to win. I also think people here work hard, you know. Now they may work in a different way, and my daughter's 24 and she's more digital than I am and works in different ways. But hard work is extremely important to be successful over the long term. I think what you have to have an appreciation for is, look, I spent a lot of time walking GE's factories and call centers and stuff like that. My father worked for GE. I know the value of a GE job. No union guy has to explain that to me, or member of the media. None of those guys have to explain to me the value of a GE job. I know the value of a job. And so I think respecting work, business leaders have to respect the people that work for them and have to respect work. And look, I like watching a jet engine be built. And the people that work there, you know, they actually like us. You know, people that work for GE like their business leaders because we're the ones that are investing and selling. And so I think valuing hard work is extremely important at all levels of the company. Yep.
Yes, sir. Stan Chapman, thank you for being here, and thank you to the men and women of GE for the innovation and the competitiveness they made that company. But from a business standpoint, and you've kind of alluded to some of your answers to your questions, how do you look at making decisions when it comes to your level? What are some of the positives and negatives that you weigh on these decision makings, whether it's opportunities or challenges?
Look, I think what you try to have in a company is you try to have a strategic planning process and a set of priorities and risk management. So we have big processes on capital allocation, strategic planning, risk management. And when you look at any big decision, you see how it goes up against those big priorities of what you have. You're going to take risk. We take, we've got more than $1 billion invested in the engine that goes into the Boeing Dreamliner, right? The 787. If the Boeing Dreamliner is a great plane, we're going to make a lot of money. Well, I think it is, by the way. If it doesn't sell as many, you know what? Not so good. And we got a lot of those going through the company at any given point in time. And you know, companies are risk-taking elements. But I think it's a triangulation between the core processes of the company, the disciplines of the company, and then every now and then, I always tell people there's 5 times a year where I basically say, okay, enough discussion, everybody shut up, this is what we're gonna go do. And if you do it 10 times, nobody wants to work for you. And if you do it 0 times, you have anarchy, you know, you just have chaos. And so the trick is to pick how many times you just say, look, we're gonna go right, get in line. And if you can't get in line, you know, keep your mouth shut. And if you can't get in line, keep your mouth shut, go do something else. You know, and so, you know, it's all about leadership and judgment and choice. You know, after 10 years, I've got my own gut for all those things. But it's really important that you do it.
Is there any technique that you can point to, or any certain
I think you
element?
try to be as good a listener as you know, I think you stay disciplined, you try to be as good a listener as you can possibly be. And then, you know, just courage. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Beth Johnson. I actually work for you here in Houston in the gasification business.
Great.
So thanks for coming. Actually, my question is about what you talked about with higher education, college, creating an engineer. As a parent of a daughter who's going off to college in a year, I'm beginning to realize just how horrifically expensive college is. To go here to Rice, even making the salary I do, and I make a good salary, thank you. I can't afford $50,000 a year. How do we make education affordable to those people who don't do what I do, who don't have the advantages to working for a corporation like GE?
You know, it's a question. I'm not sure the president's right here, the guy. So I gotta.
Yeah. By the way, if you want, give me a
I'm
scholarship.
gonna drop back and
that's all
punt.
good.
Look, I'd give you a couple thoughts. Like, I think Rice is a fantastic school, but you know, I'll be honest. You know, I went to Dartmouth. I'm on the board of Dartmouth. We don't recruit engineers from Dartmouth. We recruit them from Michigan and Illinois and Purdue and Georgia Tech. And I got to tell you, there are so many good schools in this country that I'm just wowed. Now, look, I love, this is a great school, a great engineering school and stuff like that. So one is, the strength of the country is the diversity of the schools. And you can get a good value at, there's no probably finer engineering school than the University of Illinois. And so one is you got choice.
Minnesota, I think we're better.
you got choice. The other one is, look, one of the things that I think we ought to talk about is if you finish a degree in engineering, does the whole thing get paid for? In other words, do companies pool together a pool of scholarship money and basically say, if you took the Fortune 500 companies, anybody that actually completes a degree in engineering gets it all paid for over time, right? Because I do think we need some real incentives to get kids to study physics, math, science that we're not providing today. Mm-hmm. And I think for us companies, it would be a small investment that would have a big payback. So I think there's going to have to be more scholarships available for kids to be able to get the kind of education they want.
Yeah, that's what I have to rely on. I mean, if I want to go to, she wants to go to a Dartmouth or a Rice or wherever, you're talking requiring scholarships. And as we grow the American workforce, as we make sure that everybody is given that chance, I think it becomes important that we focus on just how we can afford that.
Look, I'd say just in the non-degreed world, there's probably 2 million open jobs right now that people don't have welding experience or they're not in the right town. So we've got a big community college gap that's got to be filled as well that's also quite important.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm a GE Energy employee also, and I graduated from Rice as an engineer. My question has to do with NASA. Where does NASA and the government labs fit into U.S. competitiveness?
Look, if I were able to pick and choose, right, I would make sure that we had more R&D funding that was available in the national labs, particularly in areas like energy, right? It's been horribly underfunded. You can make your choice on national labs or things like that. And the main reason why I would do it is not for GE, but for small business. The fact is that in an area like energy, it is hard for a small business to get enough scale to really be able to participate fully in an industry like that. And those are ways that the national labs could provide more clout. But I'd have to be honest with you, with the budget issues we've got today, I just don't see an avenue, despite the fact that I personally think that would be money well spent. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Jeff Miller with Halliburton. I appreciate your comments, and I think one of the hallmarks of GE has always been execution. Love the ideas and the plans. We're certainly going to benefit as a country from your insight. How do you see, though, your ability to implement and execute some of the plans that you described tonight, certainly with all the politics that go around some of those things?
I think the nature of the group will be to stay pretty much on kind of 90-day increments with a set of ideas that we think can be executed on. Not so big that's kind of just mind-numbingly and never get any kind of bipartisanship, but try to pick off a few things that we think can be executed, 10,000 more engineers, energy retrofit programs, pick 5 or 6 regulatory areas where there might be some beneficial, and then, I just think better dialogue is, in the end, there's no easy button on creating jobs. It's just not, government really doesn't do it. It's going to have to be private business. But I think some of it is just tone and confidence that even if some of these ideas don't get applied right away, that there is more trust between business and government, and therefore businesses will go half the distance and hire people maybe ahead of time and things like that will be beneficial. So tone, I think, helps at the same time that the tactical. But we're trying to keep it in 90-day segments. Don't boil the ocean. Be accountable. We have trackers. This is a council of 18 CEOs, and nobody has time to waste. And quite honestly, I think we would love to be focused on things that can happen. Yeah.
Good evening. I am a student at Rice. I have a question about Japan's economy for the last 2 decades. People say that Japan lost 2 decades. So it's one of the largest economy and developed economy. So what mistake they did so that it dipped so much, and how countries like US or any other developed economy can avoid those type of recession in the future?
Look, in the end, growth happens in one of 3 ways: demographic growth, raw material pricing, or innovation. There's not a fourth. In other words, so if you think about the growth in China, it's driven by lots of people, innovative culture. If you think about the growth in Brazil, it's driven by raw material pricing, right? If you think about historically the US, it's been driven by demographic growth, decent raw materials over a long period of time, and innovation over a long period of time. Now, I think if you look at the US today, our R&D as a percentage of GDP has slipped dramatically. We've got to double the R&D. We've got to do a better job of harnessing the raw materials we've got. I mean, this country should be the world's leader in natural gas. We ought to treat it like a national treasure. We ought to be selling it and hawking it in every corner of the world. But raw materials are a big part. And then, we need an immigration. We need population growth, because I'm 55 and I want somebody to pay for me. Just like I've paid for all you old guys out there, I'm worried about who's going to take care of me. But I don't mean to be trivial, but population growth is a really good thing. And so that's the list. Now, Japan, no population growth, right? No raw materials. And innovation has been company-specific, not country-specific. And that's a tough triangulation, ultimately, for a country. But the US has some important differences from Japan. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Leeds. I'm a semi-retired gynecologist, as my question will show. I ask about gender bias in the workplace. With all this going on with Walmart and the Supreme Court looking at it for various reasons, what are your thoughts about that? Is it present at GE, and what are you all doing about trying to even the playing field?
So we've had strong diversity programs since really the early 80s that have been in full bloom, if you will. I basically chair a diversity council, and we track a women's network, African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, and we just added veterans. So we've got 5 groups that I track. We measure, how we recruit, right? So I can actually touch, if we recruited 10,000 people, are 50% women, I can track that. And then I basically can pick up people when they're breaking out in their career to become managers. So I can track at a high level, how's our diversity. And then in the middle, what we've done is created these organizations that do mentoring and things like that. So, basically we've got about, if you take our top 600 people, about 40% are global, and about somewhere between 25 and 30% are women. So, I've got 4 direct reports. I've got 4 board members that are women, my bosses, and 4 direct reports that are women, so we're decent.
Do you think that's a problem elsewhere, and what can be done about that?
Look, I think it's all about culture, and it's all about fairness, GE has always been driven as a meritocracy, that the best people get what they deserve. And I think if you really run your company as a meritocracy and have a little bit of social flexibility, you can have a lot of diverse people in all levels of the company.
Thank you.
Yes?
I'm Judy Allen, and I'm a partner in a family land development company. I wanted to speak about small business creation. We personally are doing everything we can to not hire that next person. And the reason is because of the unknown costs of Obamacare. We already know that there are huge taxes for small business in Obamacare, and we don't know what the tax code is going to be in 2013. I'm a little disappointed to hear that you all, and I can understand it, focusing on great big 90-day things, but the devil is in the details. And if you could get this administration to recognize how much we need to have the tax code reformed and how much we really need to know what is in the health care bill and what we can realistically do to adjust it, I think that would do a lot to help small business hiring. I hope you'll take that message back.
No, we've got 2 small business owners on the council. They are very articulate, just like you just were on I would actually say they're really stars on the council, and they're very articulate about the issues you just raised. I actually think the thing that we can probably act on the fastest is financing, and making sure that there's capital available for new, but there is a fact that new business formation is 23% lower in this recovery than in previous recoveries. And we have to all be concerned about what the reasons, is it healthcare reform, is it tax reform, but small businesses really permeates everything I've talked about. And if I had to give you one headline on what I think the council can do, it is improve the role and a lot of the elements around small business and new business creation.
We're going to have just time for 2 more questions. I hate to cut it off, especially when the president of the university's wife is in the back of the line there. So, but you can ask your question later. Okay, so
my name is David Newberger. I'm a proud General Electric shareholder, and with the issue in Japan with nuclear energy, what is GE's position? What are you learning about that issue, and where do you think this is going to be a major problem? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is an area that you're counting on generating a lot of growth in your company.
So, I think the Japan situation is still evolving. Most of the stuff that I would repeat to you is actually public information. I think the site's been stabilized. Remediation is going to take time as you go through it. A 9 earthquake and a 50-foot tsunami is a very tough 1-2 punch. But I think the site's making progress, but it's going to be a long time before the site is really completely remediated.
But do you see this as a setback?
What I would say is before Japan. So let's kind of think about where the world was before the devastation in Japan, and then what it might mean. Personally, I think before that happened, the nuclear industry wasn't really experiencing a renaissance. Combination of low natural gas prices, plus just, for any public utility, investing $6 or $8 billion in a new nuclear power plant wasn't going to take place. So I would say there's really only one project in the U.S. before the crisis that is really going to happen, and that was really probably Southern Company in Georgia. Europe, more or less the same way. And so really the only real build of nuclear power in essence was in China, pre-crisis. I actually think people have been fairly non-hysterical and facts. I think people should learn about the crisis as it goes on. It'll be studied by the NRC and all the other regulators. We should study what we can learn to make the industry safer. Whether or not this slows it down, I don't know yet, but I really do think we need a nuclear power industry. You know, I don't know if it's going to be in this decade or next, but somehow, some way, we're going to want to have a nuclear power industry in the future. So again, I would say even before the crisis, there was really no nuclear renaissance going on, at least in this country. And the question is what happens next, and we should be thoughtful, but at the same time, I think we should be wanting to keep nuclear as part of the mix over the long term. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Noah Levine. I'm a student here at Rice. And my question is, do you really think it's possible to improve the quality of public education with the budget cuts and teacher layoffs that are occurring everywhere right now?
You know, I'm not, you know, an expert in the field per se, right? So I'm not going to be able to quote statistics on class size and what's happening in the public service debate and things like that. I do think that public education is key. GE has spent about $150 million a year on secondary education in 7 cities around the country. And so we go into inner city schools in New York City, Erie, Pennsylvania, Louisville, Kentucky, Atlanta, Georgia, Milwaukee, and we sit down with the union, the principal, the teachers. They all have to sign an agreement, the school board. They all have to sign an agreement, Cincinnati. Then we give $25 million over 5 years, so it is a ton of money, and say, we want to see measurements improve in math and science. And we've been at it long enough to say, when you focus on curriculum with public school teachers that may or may not be members of union, and you have a curriculum and focus and training and all that stuff, you get good results. We need that. We've got to make the schools better. And I'm just, you know, I don't want to get myself injected in the middle of the public debate on, you know, what's the right mix of union, non-union, and teachers, other than to say, business has to be involved. Public education is critically important. And I've seen 7 experiments where a good public-private partnership has produced tremendous results. And we plan to continue giving more out of the GE Foundation in secondary education.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Mr. Immelt for a very generous use of your time.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.